Have you ever had someone in your life who made you feel small? Who looked at you and decided you weren't good enough? Who tried to control you so subtly you started to wonder if you were losing your mind? Yeah, I had one. Her name was Margaret, my mother-in-law. Now before you think, oh great, another annoying mother-in-law story, let me stop you for a second. Because this isn't about a mother-in-law who makes offhand comments at Sunday lunch. No, this is about a woman who created a contract. That's right, an 8-page contract, demanding I sign it before marrying her son. A document that basically turned my life into an elegant prison. And the worst part? She gave me an ultimatum. Sign it or forget the wedding. Most people would run, right? Or fight, or cry. But me? I did something different. Something Margaret never, ever expected. I signed. But not the way she imagined. Because while she thought she was trapping me, I was building the perfect trap. A trap that took 5 years to close. And when it did, she begged me not to show that paper to any judge. Now you're probably wondering, how does a piece of paper become the most powerful weapon against the person who wrote it? How does the victim become the one in control? And most importantly, did I go too far? Was the revenge excessive? Stick with me for the next few minutes because I'm going to tell you exactly how I turned 5 years of humiliation into the most satisfying comeback of my life. And by the end, you'll understand something that completely changed how I see boundaries. Respect. And yes, revenge. Because revenge, when done right, isn't about destroying someone. It's about reclaiming what was taken from you. And what was taken from me was my dignity. I took it back, with interest, with paperwork, and with her own signature. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law tried to enslave me with a contract, and ended up trapped by her own poison. You know that feeling when you meet someone and it's like the universe conspired to bring you together? Yeah, that's exactly how I felt when I met David. I was 26, working as a junior architect, fighting for every project like it was my last. I came from a simple family. The kind that teaches you nothing falls from the sky, and dignity isn't negotiable. My name is Sarah, and this story I'm about to tell completely changed how I think about boundaries, respect, and yes, revenge. Not the movie-style explosive revenge, the kind wrapped in patience and strategy. The kind you prepare slowly, because some battles aren't won with shouting, but with signed documents. David was the kind of man any woman would dream of introducing to her parents. A successful dentist, polite, with a smile that lit up the room. When he laughed, all my worries faded. We started dating after meeting at a corporate event, and for 3 years I lived on cloud 9. He treated me well, affectionate, attentive. We planned a future together. We talked about kids, about the house we'd build. But you know how you ignore the little warning signs life gives you? Those red flags you pretend not to see because you're too in love? Yeah, I ignored a lot. And the biggest one had a name. Margaret. Margaret was David's mother. And when I say she had presence, that's me being polite. Picture a woman who married for convenience, spent her life controlling every little detail around her, and now had one project left, her only son. From the beginning, I noticed odd things. Margaret chose David's outfits for important events. Yes, a 30-year-old man whose clothes were picked by his mom. She had a key to his apartment and dropped by unannounced, always at the absolute worst moments. It was like she had a sensor that tripped whenever we were alone. And the comments. Oh, those veiled jabs that cut deeper than any knife. Sarah, dear, that dress is interesting. In our family, we tend to dress more sober. Or, oh, your mom's a hairdresser? How charming. David always grew up around doctors and businessmen, you know. Every sentence was a disguised barb. Every look a silent assessment where I always came up short. But I swallowed it, smiled, and kept going. Because I loved David. And love, in my naive head back then, meant putting up with everything silently. It meant being the perfect daughter-in-law. The one who doesn't cause conflict, who accepts being diminished in the name of family harmony. Today I know that's not love. That's self-destruction wrapped in a bow. After 3 years of dating, David proposed. It happened on a beach at sunset. All that romantic movie energy. I said yes through tears, feeling like my life was finally falling into place. But do you know what he did next? Before calling my parents, before celebrating alone with me, he picked up the phone and called his mother. "Mom?" She said yes. "You're the first to know." I should have woken up right then. I should have realized I wouldn't be the priority in that marriage. But you only see these things when you're already in the deep end, right? The revenge I didn't even know I was brewing began exactly in that moment of blind joy. David wasn't malicious. He was weak. He had never, in his life, disagreed with his mother about anything. He was a good man, but a mama's boy when it came to Margaret. And me? I was the intruder threatening her reign. In her mind, no woman would ever be good enough for her son. I was especially unsuitable because I came from below, had no prestigious last name, and my bank account didn't have the zeros hers did. Margaret didn't see me as a person. She saw me as a threat to the control she held over David. And people like that don't play fair. They play with contracts, manipulation, and psychological games that leave you questioning your sanity. Those first weeks of engagement should have been about dresses, honeymoons, and guest lists. Instead, I felt like I was walking into a war without knowing the weapons. Margaret smiled at me, but her eyes calculated every move. David was so happy he didn't see anything. And me? I was about to find out how far a controlling mother would go, how far someone would go to maintain power over another person. And unknowingly, I was 2 weeks away from receiving the invitation that would change everything. The invitation that would teach me that sometimes the best revenge isn't to explode. It's to document, to wait, to let the enemy dig their own grave while you hold the shovel. 2 weeks after the engagement, I got a call from Margaret. Her voice had that sugary, artificial sweetness, like poisoned honey. "Sarah, dear, we need to have our first mother-in-law, daughter-in-law lunch. How about tomorrow at my house? Just the two of us. Women's talk." David thought it was wonderful. "My mom is making an effort, love. It'll be great for you two to get closer." Of course I agreed. What could I say? That I had a bad feeling? That the invite felt more like a summons? We ignore intuition because we don't want to seem paranoid. But let me tell you a secret. Every time you get that chill down your spine, that inner voice yelling, "Be careful," listen, intuition rarely lies. Mine was screaming that day. I arrived at her house on time. And when I say house, I'm being modest. It was a mansion. Automatic gate, immaculate lawn, architecture that screamed money from every brick. I was greeted by a housekeeper who led me to the dining room. Margaret was there, fully made up, smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. "Sarah, I'm so happy you came." A lie. She was happy I'd walked into her trap. The lunch began with the usual small talk. Phony compliments about my hair and outfit, invasive questions about my family, my finances, my career plans. Every question felt like a test. Every answer I gave was measured, weighed, judged. I felt like I was in a job interview, not at an in-law lunch. The food was amazing, clearly prepared by a private chef, but I could barely swallow. The atmosphere was heavy. Margaret talked about her family, about how they'd always valued tradition, lineage, respectable people. Veiled comments about class differences came wrapped in smiles. "You know, Sarah, our family tends to marry within the same, let's say, social circle. It's important to share values and references, don't you think?" I only nodded politely, keeping my composure. Inside, my stomach churned. Not from the food, but from humiliation. But I swallowed it, because that's what women like me were taught. Swallow your pride, swallow your anger, smile, and be grateful for whatever crumbs of approval they toss your way. Then came dessert. Some fancy pastry whose name I don't even remember. Right after my first bite, Margaret's whole demeanor changed. The smile vanished. Her eyes turned cold and calculating. She stood, walked to a sideboard, and returned with a thick envelope. She placed it on the table between us like a bomb about to go off. "We need to talk about the wedding, Sarah. Woman to woman." My heart raced. This wasn't a chat. This was an ambush. She opened the envelope and pulled out a document. 8 pages, tiny print, legalese I could barely process because my head was spinning. I prepared this agreement to protect my son and our family. I took the document with shaking hands and began to read. With each line, my blood ran colder. It wasn't an agreement. It was a modern slavery contract. Margaret had drafted clause after clause designed to completely erase me. I would renounce any claim to David's assets, even those acquired after marriage. In a divorce, I would walk away with only what I'd brought. Essentially nothing. I could not work after having children, rendering me fully dependent. Margaret would have the right to visit our home daily. Daily. Decisions about our children, my children, would require her approval. Family vacations would be mandatory with her present. David would keep a separate bank account to which she would have access. I couldn't apply for loans or credit without her permission. And that was just the start. There was so much more. The children's surnames would prioritize David's family name. There was a proper behavior clause, defined solely by her. Each word in that document was a chain, each clause a bar on a cage. When I finished reading, I looked at Margaret. She watched me with the sort of superiority you see in a cat toying with a mouse before killing it. "Well, Sarah? What do you think?" My voice came out thin and trembling. "Margaret, this is absurd. I can't sign something like this." She tilted her head, still smiling. "Can't? Or don't want to?" The difference between those two questions was enormous, and we both knew it. This was the moment of truth. The moment she bared her claws. Margaret leaned forward, hands folded on the table, eyes locked on mine. "Let me be clear, Sarah. You are not good enough for my son, but I'm being generous. I'm giving you a chance to be part of this family, provided you accept your place. If you truly love David, you'll prove it by signing this." Each sentence stabbed. Each pause was calculated to make me feel small, unworthy, grateful for the opportunity to humiliate myself. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, with the little courage I had left. She smiled that icy smile I'll never forget. "If you don't sign, I'll convince my son to call off the wedding. And believe me, Sarah, he will listen. He always listens to me. Painful, but true. You have 48 hours to decide," she continued, pushing the document toward me. I reached out. "May I take it to read calmly? Maybe show it to someone, get advice, understand the terms better?" Margaret laughed, a short, humorless sound. "No, dear. Either you sign now, or you leave the paper on the table and go. Your choice." My world collapsed in that instant. I looked at the paper, at that woman, and understood something. She didn't want a daughter-in-law. She wanted property, someone she could control, diminish, erase. And for the first time in my life, I felt something stronger than sadness or fear. I felt anger, a cold, calculated anger that doesn't scream or sob, an anger that plans, an anger that waits, an anger that becomes revenge. And in that moment, without realizing it, Margaret had just created her own enemy. I left that mansion with the document in my hands and my legs shaking. I got into my car, shut the door, and only then did the tears come. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were pure, burning rage, the kind that scorches your face, hot and loaded with every humiliation you'd swallowed. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I breathed, wiped my face, and grabbed my phone. I called my best friend, Amanda. And here's the detail Margaret never imagined. Amanda was a lawyer, family law specialist. When she picked up, I could barely speak. "Amanda, you won't believe what just happened." Her voice went serious immediately. "I'm listening. Tell me everything." I met Amanda at her office that same day. I arrived still trembling, the cursed document in my bag like a live grenade. I spread the 8 pages on her desk and watched as her face changed while she read. When she finished, Amanda looked up and let out a disbelieving laugh. "Sarah, this has no legal value. It's ridiculous. No judge would take this seriously." My heart jumped. Really? She nodded. Really. But that but felt like an anchor dropping. But what? Amanda leaned forward, eyes bright. The look someone gets when they've just had an idea. If you were coerced into signing, your mother-in-law committed a crime, and if we document the coercion, that becomes proof against her. It was like a light bulb in my head. Amanda spoke fast, excited. Think about it, Sarah. She threatened you, gave you an ultimatum, coerced you emotionally. If we record the threats, document everything, you not only nullify that ridiculous contract, you also build ammunition to protect yourself going forward. I stared at her, still processing. Are you suggesting I set a trap for her? Amanda smiled. Not a trap. Protection. Strategy. Look, you can run from this marriage now and let her win. Or you can play her game, but by your rules. And believe me, Sarah, people like Margaret only respect one thing. Power. And knowledge is power. Her words echoed. Revenge wasn't about shouting or slamming doors. It was about being prepared. It was about holding the knife and the cheese when the time came. We spent the next 48 hours crafting a plan so detailed it felt like a movie script. First, I would go back to Margaret and say I agreed to sign. Surprising her was essential. Second, Amanda would come with me, posing as a friend who gave me a ride. She'd stay in the car, but close enough if I needed her. Third, I would record everything. In Brazil, you can legally record conversations when you're a party to them. I'd get Margaret to repeat every threat, every humiliation, every demand. Crystal clear audio. Fourth, Amanda would prepare 2 versions of the paper. One I would actually sign, with a hidden clause that voided everything in cases of coercion. The original would remain with me. Margaret would never know the difference. Amanda coached me word for word. What to say, how to act, what to ask. You have to make her feel like she's won, Sarah. Let her talk. Let her boast. The more she says, the better for us. We rehearsed until it felt natural. I had to look submissive without being defeated. I had to seem like I was giving in out of love, not fear. It was high-stakes theater. My future freedom depended on it. We even recorded phone calls Margaret made to check if I'd made up my mind. With every call, she incriminated herself more, telling me I should accept my place, that David couldn't disobey his mother. Every word was another rope she braided for her own noose. And I let her. Because the sweetest revenge isn't quick, it's precise. There was a moment that tested everything. I had to tell David. Not the whole plan, of course, but enough. I showed him the document and watched his face. Initial shock, confusion, a flash of anger. My mother did this? I nodded, hopeful. Maybe he'd wake up. Maybe he'd defend me. Maybe he'd finally choose his wife over his mother. But then he sighed. That tired sigh of someone who doesn't want to deal with conflict. Look, love, my mom's just worried. She goes too far sometimes, but it's because she cares. Can't you just sign to calm her? It doesn't mean anything. In that instant, something in me died, and something new was born. Colder, more calculating. I smiled at David and said, "Okay, I'll handle it." And I handled it, but not the way he expected. I decided to marry David, yes, because I loved him despite everything. But I also decided I would never be anyone's prisoner again. I would keep my plan B active like an insurance policy, ready at all times against Margaret's toxicity. Amanda taught me something those days. Hope for the best, but always prepare for the worst. That's exactly what I was doing. Preparing, documenting, building my own silent revenge. Because controlling people underestimate others. Margaret saw me as a simple girl, easy to manipulate. She had no idea I'd decided to play chess, while she thought we were playing checkers. And in chess, dear Margaret, you lose when you least expect it. The day to go back to Margaret's mansion arrived. I woke up with that chill in my stomach, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. You know the feeling when you're about to do something risky but necessary. Like you're jumping off a cliff, but this time you have a parachute. I put on a simple, discreet outfit, the kind that said, "I accept my place." I slipped the tiny recorder into my pocket and tested it 3 times to make sure it was working. Amanda was in her car, parked 2 blocks down, ready for any emergency. I breathed deeply, looked in the mirror, and whispered to myself, "You can do this. You aren't doing it for cheap revenge. You're doing it for protection." But let's be honest, a part of me wanted to see her face when she found out she had underestimated the wrong daughter-in-law. I rang the bell. The same housekeeper greeted me, but this time her look was different. Pity, maybe? Or recognition, as if she too had been a victim of Margaret's control. I was led again into that dining room that now felt like an arena. Margaret sat there, immaculate as ever, but her expression when she saw me was priceless. Genuine surprise. She hadn't expected me to come back. She thought I'd run, that I'd give up on David, that I'd prove her right about me. "Sarah, I thought you'd given up." I smiled, calm, almost resigned. "I love David, Margaret. If signing this paper is what's needed for me to marry the man I love, then I'll sign." I saw the victorious glint in her eyes. She thought she'd won. Poor Margaret. So smart, but so blinded by arrogance. She pushed the document toward me, pen already poised. But I didn't take it. Not yet. "Margaret, before I sign, I need you to explain every clause to me, in detail. I want to understand exactly what I'm agreeing to." I saw irritation cross her face, but also pride. She wanted to explain. She wanted to rub every humiliating term in my face. "Of course, dear. Let's go through it." And she began, clause by clause, savoring it. She talked about my forfeiture of rights to assets, about leaving my career, about her daily access to our home, about her approval over decisions regarding my children. Every word pouring from her mouth was like poison being emptied, and every word was being recorded. Clear, crystalline, indisputable. Amanda was listening live through the earpiece I'd hidden. "And here," she pointed to an especially cruel clause, "you agree that any inappropriate behavior, as I define it, may result in family consequences." I swallowed hard, hands clasped in my lap. What kind of consequences? Margaret smiled. That snake smile. "Well, if you don't behave like a proper wife and mother, I reserve the right to suggest David rethink the marriage. And believe me, Sarah, he listens to me." She spoke with total confidence, as if discussing the weather. Casual, natural. To her, I wasn't a person. I was a project, property to be molded and controlled. And all of it. Every venomous word, every veiled threat, was being documented. Amanda would be hearing it in real time through the hidden earpiece. When Margaret finished explaining, she leaned back satisfied. "Any questions?" I shook my head. "No. It's all very clear." I picked up the pen, and my hand didn't tremble. Not at all. Want to know why? Because I knew exactly what I was doing. The paper I was about to sign had been prepared by Amanda. It looked identical to the original, but it contained a hidden clause buried in the legalese. "This document is null in the event of proven coercion." 4 words. Small. Almost invisible in all that text. But as powerful as a nuclear bomb. Margaret didn't read it. Of course she didn't. She was so convinced of her victory she didn't bother checking. Arrogance, my dear, is the downfall of many clever people. And Margaret was about to learn that the hard way. I signed every page. Margaret watched with that satisfied smile, like a queen seeing her subject bow. When I finished, she folded the paper carefully and locked it in a personal safe right there in the room. "Excellent, Sarah. You made the right choice. Now we can move forward as a real family." She even hugged me. A cold hug with no affection, merely a marker of territory. I returned the gesture, still playing the submissive daughter-in-law. "Thank you for giving me this chance, Margaret." The words almost stuck in my throat, but they came out. When I left that house with the real copy of the paper in my bag and the recording safe on my phone, I didn't feel defeated. I felt powerful, because for the first time in my life, I understood a fundamental truth. Revenge isn't about making the other suffer. It's about making sure they can never hurt you again. I got into Amanda's car. She looked at me tense. "Well?" I smiled, a genuine smile this time. She fell for it. "We have everything recorded. Every threat, every humiliation, every cruel clause explained by her own mouth. Amanda slapped my hand, proud. "Sarah, you were incredible. Now keep this locked away." And that's what I did. I stored that material like one stores gold. Not because I wanted to use it immediately, but because I knew I might need it. People like Margaret don't change. She wouldn't simply accept me into the family. She would keep pushing, testing, crossing lines. And when she pushed too far, I would be ready, with documents, with proof, with her own voice condemning her. The most silent revenge is the one you prepare and don't deploy until the exact right moment. And I had just built mine. 1 week after that disastrous party, I scheduled a meeting. Not at my house, not at hers. On neutral ground, Amanda's office. I summoned 3 people, David, Margaret, and my lawyer. The invitation was formal, by email, with time and address. Margaret must have thought it was my final surrender, that I was going to accept the divorce, maybe even hand over custody of my son on a silver platter. David was nervous, not understanding what was happening. "Sarah, what is all this? Why a lawyer?" I just smiled and said, "You'll understand. Because there are moments in life when words aren't enough. When you need to put documents on the table and let the truth do the dirty work." And this was one of those moments. The revenge I had cultivated for 5 years was about to bloom, and it would be beautiful to watch. Margaret arrived on time, of course. Always so controlled, so self-assured. She entered the meeting room with that air of superiority, like a queen entering her palace. She greeted Amanda with a cold wave, looked at me with contempt, and sat down with impeccable posture. "Well, Sarah, let's get this over with. I imagine you called me here to discuss divorce terms. I'm willing to be reasonable, as long as you don't cause trouble." I could see in her eyes. She thought she had won, that she had broken me, that 5 years of psychological warfare had finally worked. Poor Margaret. If she had known what was about to happen, she would have run from that room. But blind arrogance, right? She was completely blinded by her own hubris. Amanda opened the meeting in a professional, cold tone. "Thank you for coming. This meeting was called to discuss some serious issues involving coercion, invasion of privacy, and defamation." Margaret frowned, confused. David, too. I just watched, with the calm of someone who knows exactly how the play ends. Amanda continued. 5 years ago, Mrs. Margaret presented a document to Sarah, demanding that she sign it under threat. I put the contract on the table. The same document Margaret had kept so carefully in her safe. How did I get a copy? Well, when you have the right resources and an arrogant mother-in-law who thinks no one is clever enough to challenge her, these things happen. Margaret went pale. Just a little, but I noticed. This document, Amanda pointed with her pen, has no legal value. None. Any judge would laugh at it. But what has legal value is the context of the signature. Sarah signed this paper under explicit coercion. You threatened to sabotage her marriage, said she wasn't good enough, gave her an ultimatum. Amanda paused, letting each word hang heavy in the air. And you did all of this while being recorded. I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. Margaret's voice echoed through the room. "If you don't sign, I'll convince my son to call off the wedding. And believe me, Sarah, he'll listen to me. He always has." I watched the color drain from her face. David was frozen, looking at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was. After all, masks fall quickly when there is hard proof. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Amanda continued. Over the last 5 years, Sarah documented every intrusion, every defamatory remark, every attempt at control. I laid out on the table photos, messages, emails, diary notes. 5 years of evidence organized in folders. Margaret showing up at the couple's home unannounced. Margaret spreading lies to the family about Sarah being a neglectful mother. Margaret trying to convince David to ask for a divorce. All documented. All with dates, times, and context. I saw panic grow in her eyes. That panic of someone who realizes they fell into a trap they built themselves. And a week ago, Amanda raised her voice. In front of a room full of witnesses, you threatened to seek custody of Sarah's grandson, based on false allegations of maternal neglect. Silence. a silence so heavy it seemed to suck the air out of the room. Margaret tried to recover. She tried to do what she always did. Control the narrative. This is ridiculous. It's a setup. Sarah is trying to incriminate me because she can't accept that I only want what's best for my son and grandson. But her voice trembled. For the first time in 5 years, I saw Margaret out of control. And it was glorious. Amanda shook her head, almost pitying. Mrs. Margaret, you have committed coercion, a crime under Article 151 of the Penal Code, repeated invasion of privacy, defamation. I have sufficient evidence for criminal and civil proceedings. And given your assets, damages could include significant property, including your residence. That was the last straw. Margaret stood up, furious. You can't do this to me! I'm his mother! I have rights! I stood up too, looking her directly in the eyes. And I said, with a calm that surprised even me, You have rights, but you don't have the right to destroy me. David finally spoke, his voice weak, shocked. Mom, you did all this? Really? Margaret turned to him, desperate. Son, she's manipulating you. This woman is no good. I was trying to protect you. But David shook his head, and for the first time in 5 years of marriage, I saw him choose. He looked at his mother and said, No, Mom. You were trying to control. And you're done. That moment, that tiny instant when my husband finally woke up, was worth every second of humiliation I swallowed. Worth every tear I held back. Because revenge isn't just about making them pay. It's about reclaiming your dignity. And in that room, in front of everyone, I had reclaimed mine. Margaret was cornered, defeated, and for the first time, I was the one with power. Not because I was cruel, but because I was smart, because I waited, because I documented, because I turned her weapon into my victory. Margaret was standing, trembling, her hands clutching the back of the chair as if that were the only thing holding her upright. Amanda used the heavy silence to continue. Now, let's discuss what happens from here. She opened a new folder and pulled out 2 documents. Sarah has 2 options to offer you, Margaret. And I suggest you pay very close attention, because this will determine the rest of your life. I sat back down, crossed my legs, and waited. Because this was the moment I had rehearsed in my head, hundreds of times. The moment the victim becomes the protagonist. The moment the submissive daughter-in-law shows she was the strongest person in the room all along. Amanda placed the papers on the table, turned toward Margaret. Option 1, she began, her voice as steady as steel. Sarah files criminal charges against you for coercion. Uses all these recordings, all these documents, everything. The case goes public. Imagine the headlines, Margaret. Wealthy socialite tries to enslave daughter-in-law with absurd contract. Millionaire mother-in-law convicted of coercion and defamation. Your name, your reputation, everything you built turns to dust, and given the evidence we have, conviction is almost certain. I saw Margaret swallow. I saw her pride wrestle with reality. In addition to the criminal case, Amanda continued, relentless, we have a civil suit. Emotional damages, psychological damages, 5 years of documented emotional torture. A judge could easily award a multi-million-dollar settlement. Your house, your investments, everything could be at stake. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before storms. Or surrenders. Option 2. Amanda turned the page. You sign an agreement now. Here. In this room. She read the terms, each one more humiliating to Margaret than the last. You never enter Sarah and David's home without an express invitation. You never make decisions about your grandson without consulting his parents. You issue a public apology in front of the entire family who were at that birthday, admitting you defamed Sarah. You participate in mandatory family therapy with a therapist chosen by Sarah. And here's the most important part. Amanda paused dramatically. If you break any of these clauses, Sarah is authorized to use all this material in criminal and civil proceedings automatically. No prior notice. No second chances. I put my phone on the table and started the timer. You have 60 seconds to decide, Margaret. Starting now. I hit start. The first 20 seconds were pure panic in her eyes. Margaret tried to bargain. Wait. This is absurd. I can't accept these conditions. You're blackmailing me. Amanda, cold as ice. This is not blackmail. It's consequence. 40 seconds. Margaret turned to David, those pleading eyes that always worked. Son, are you going to let them do this to me? I'm your mother. Say something. And David, my David, who spent 5 years sitting on the fence, finally jumped on the right side. He looked at his mother with a mix of disappointment and sadness. Mom, you did this to my wife, to the mother of my child. For 5 years. I don't even know who you are anymore. Those words hurt her more than any lawsuit could, because Margaret didn't care about money. She cared about control, about power, and she had just lost both. 30 seconds, I announced, keeping my eyes fixed on her. I saw anger, humiliation, wounded pride wrestling inside her. But I also saw fear, real fear of losing everything, of becoming a headline, of having her name dragged through the mud. 25 seconds. Margaret picked up the pen with a shaking hand. You'll regret this, she said. But it was an empty threat. We all knew it. Amanda pushed the document closer. 20 seconds. Choose wisely. And it was in that moment I realized something. Revenge is not about destroying the other person. It's about reclaiming what was taken from you. Dignity, respect, peace. I could destroy Margaret completely. I could sue her, take everything from her, turn her life to ashes, but that would make me the same as her. And I didn't want to be Margaret. I wanted to be Sarah, the Sarah who sets boundaries, the Sarah who protects herself, the Sarah who wins without losing her humanity in the process. 10 seconds. Margaret looked at me, really saw me for the first time. Not as the inadequate daughter-in-law, not as the threat to her control, but as the woman she had underestimated for a full 5 years. 5 seconds, she signed. Each page, each clause, every term that completely reversed the power dynamic between us. When she set the pen down, she looked 10 years older. Amanda collected the document, made 3 copies right then, and handed one to each party. This agreement takes effect immediately. Any violation will be met with immediate legal action. Margaret stood, grabbed her purse with hands still trembling. Before she left, she looked at me. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Defeat was written on every line of her face. When the door closed behind her, I finally breathed. 5 years of tension leaving my lungs all at once. David sat there, processing everything. Finally, he looked at me, tears in his eyes. Sarah, I didn't know. I mean, I knew my mom was controlling, but I never imagined it was this bad. I could have been cruel. I could have thrown in his face every time he chose his mother over me. Every time he minimized my suffering. But you know what I did? I took his hand. David, you were blind. But today you saw, and that's what matters now. Because revenge against Margaret had already been served. But my marriage deserved a chance. A real chance. Without her shadow over every decision. Every moment. Amanda smiled at me, proud. Sarah, you were amazing. And I felt amazing. Not because I destroyed someone, but because I saved myself. Because I proved you can be kind and still be strong. That you can forgive without being a doormat. That revenge, when done right, isn't about hate. It's about justice. 6 months have passed since that meeting in Amanda's office. And you know what changed? Everything. Absolutely everything. Margaret kept the agreement to the letter. At first I thought she'd try to skirt it, find loopholes, pull her usual tricks. But she didn't. She learned the hard way that I wasn't bluffing. Visits are now scheduled at least 48 hours in advance. She arrives, stays for the agreed time, is polite, albeit forced, and leaves. No key to our house, no raiding my kitchen, no rearranging my life. The first times were awkward, tense, but over time we established a routine where I'm in control, where my home is mine, where my child is mine. And you know what? I don't take pleasure in seeing her diminished. I feel relief. Relief at finally being able to breathe in my own life. The public apologies happened at a family lunch I organized. I gathered everyone who was at that disastrous birthday. Margaret arrived, clearly uncomfortable, and in front of everyone said, "I want to apologize to Sarah. I made unfair accusations that she was a neglectful mother. They weren't true. Sarah is a devoted mother and an excellent professional." The words came out mechanical, rehearsed. But they came out, and everyone heard. I saw some relatives with shocked expressions, others with something that looked like respect. For me, not for her. Aunts who used to look at me condescendingly now greet me differently. Because it became clear. Sarah is no longer the daughter-in-law who keeps her head down. Sarah is the daughter-in-law who sets boundaries. And in families like David's, respect only comes when you show you won't be walked over. Sad, but true. Family therapy was surprisingly revealing. Not that Margaret changed. People like her rarely truly change. But David understood. He understood the patterns, the manipulation, how much he'd been conditioned since childhood to never contradict his mother. The therapist, a man in his 60s with decades of experience, was blunt in one session. "David, you were taught that love means obedience, that being a good son means erasing your own needs. But real love doesn't make you choose between your mother and your spouse. Real love respects boundaries." That opened his eyes in a way I never could. Sometimes you need to hear certain truths from strangers to actually believe them. After that session, David started individual therapy too. And our marriage improved more in these 6 months than it did in 5 years. My business kept growing. I closed 2 more big contracts, hired a small but talented team, and we're doing work I'm proud of. David now speaks of my success with genuine admiration, not that awkward discomfort from before. He understands that my financial independence doesn't diminish him. In fact, it strengthens us, because now we are true partners, not dependent and provider. And our son? He's growing up in a healthier environment. He sees his mother being respected. He sees his father setting limits with his grandmother. He sees that love isn't about control, but about genuine care. Those lessons are worth more than any inheritance Margaret could leave, because I learned something on this journey. The best revenge isn't destroying your opponent. It's building such a good life that they become irrelevant. I keep all those documents tucked away. The recording, the contract, the evidence from the 5 years. Not because I expect to use them, but because they're my insurance policy. My guarantee. Amanda once told me, "Sarah, power isn't about using force. It's about having the force and choosing not to use it." And that's exactly it. I could have destroyed Margaret, financially, socially, emotionally, but I chose boundaries. I chose proportional consequences. I chose the solution that gave me peace, not more war. And you know what that taught me? That revenge carried out intelligently doesn't need to be cruel. It needs to be just. It needs to be strategic. It needs to come wrapped in legal documents, not in screaming or violence. It needs to leave the other person alive to learn from the consequences of their own actions. There are days when Margaret looks at me with something that almost resembles respect, maybe even reluctant admiration, because deep down, controlling people respect strength. They despise weakness, but they recognize when they find an opponent worthy of them. I became the opponent she didn't expect. The quiet, submissive daughter-in-law revealed she had sharp teeth, and now she knows. I bite, not for pleasure, but out of necessity, for protection, for self-respect, and that awareness changed the whole dynamic. Margaret no longer sees me as someone she can manipulate. She sees me as someone who could destroy her if she crosses the line again. And you know what's curious? That veiled but real threat has given us more peace than 5 years of being nice ever did. Because some people only understand the language of power. Recently, on a Sunday afternoon, we were having a picnic in the park. Me, David, our son chasing pigeons, the sun shining in that way that makes you grateful to be alive. My phone rang. It was Margaret. For a second, that cold feeling in my stomach came back, that residual fear that the war might start again. But then I breathed. I looked at David, who smiled encouragingly. I answered, "Hi, Margaret." Calm, controlled voice. "Sarah." I was wondering, may I visit you next Sunday, around 3 p.m.? Can I bring a dessert? Polite. Respecting protocol. Asking permission. I smiled. Yes, Sunday at 3 is great. Bring a dessert. See you then. I hung up. David hugged me from behind, kissed my neck. Our son ran back laughing, asking to play. And in that moment, that perfect instant, I realized this was my final revenge. It wasn't Margaret destroyed. It was me happy. It was me at peace. It was me living the life I deserved, on my own terms, with clear boundaries and respect guaranteed. And that, yes, that was a real victory. So, we've reached the end of this story, and I know what you're probably thinking. Maybe you're asking yourself, Sarah, didn't you go too far? Did you really need to take it that far? And look, that's a fair question. It's a question I asked myself many times over those 5 years. But let me ask you something in return. How many years do you put up with being belittled before you react? How many humiliations do you swallow in silence before you draw a line? How many times do you bite your tongue, smile politely, and let someone trample your dignity because it's easier not to create conflict? I did that for 5 years. 5 years of being polite while being destroyed on the inside. And you know what I learned? Kindness without boundaries isn't a virtue. It's self-destruction. The truth is this. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice. There's a huge difference between the two. Revenge is wanting the other person to suffer for the pleasure of seeing their suffering. Justice is setting consequences for actions that hurt you. Revenge is emotional, explosive, often disproportionate. Justice is calculated, documented, proportional. I didn't destroy Margaret for pleasure. I stopped her because she wasn't going to stop on her own. Controlling people don't respond to polite requests. They respond to concrete boundaries. And I set mine with documents, recordings, and a legal agreement. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, I want you to pause for a second and think about your own life. Is someone controlling you, belittling you, making you feel like you're never good enough? Could be a mother-in-law, father-in-law, boss, friend, even a partner. And you're putting up with it because, why exactly? Because you want to keep the peace? Because you're afraid of conflict? Because you were taught that being nice means accepting everything quietly? Let me tell you a secret I learned the hard way. Accepting abuse isn't kindness. It's cowardice disguised as virtue. And I'm not judging. I did the exact same thing for years. But there came a point when I had to choose. Keep getting walked over or stand up and show that I had teeth. You don't have to be aggressive to be strong. You don't have to shout to be heard. But you do need to document. You need proof. You need to turn he said, she said into here's the recording, here's the document, here are the facts. Because in the real world, emotion loses to evidence. Tears lose to contracts. Promises lose to signatures. Margaret thought she had all the power because she had money, status, and emotional control over her son. But I had something more powerful. Preparation, patience, and her own arrogance working against her. The best trap is the one the enemy builds for you while you're just holding the bricks. So what do I want you to take from this story? 3 things. First, document everything. If someone is mistreating you, keep proof. Messages, emails, recordings, when legal, witnesses. You may never need them, but if you do, you'll be thankful you have them. Second, boundaries aren't cruelty. Saying no doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a healthy person. Third, if revenge is necessary, make it strategic, not emotional. It's not about making the other person suffer. It's about making sure they can't hurt you again. It's about reclaiming your power, your peace, your dignity. And now I want to hear from you. Comment below. Have you been through something similar? Is someone in your life trying to control you? Do you think I went too far? Or did exactly what needed to be done? Don't be afraid to share your story. Sometimes just writing it down, letting it out, is the start of processing and finding your own solution. And who knows? Your story might help someone else going through the same thing right now. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. Telling this story wasn't easy, but I felt I had to because I know there are a lot of people out there feeling trapped, small, powerless, and I want you to know, you're not. You have more power than you think. You just need to learn how to use it. And if this video helped you in any way, made you reflect, or gave you courage to set your own boundaries, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because I'll keep sharing real stories about boundaries, respect, and how to reclaim your power in toxic relationships. Oh, and one last thing. Margaret and I now have a functional relationship. We're not friends. We probably never will be. But there's respect. There are boundaries. There's peace. And you know why? Because she learned I'm not the daughter-in-law she can manipulate. I'm the daughter-in-law who bites back. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's what controlling people need to learn.